Professor Idrisi. Can you hear me in the back?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, you can. Okay. Or I can use the microphone. All right. Okay. Thank you. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ah, very good. So, okay. So, while we're waiting for the PowerPoint, I like to do things with pictures and maps. Okay, so hopefully we can get there. First of all, again, I want to repeat, my thanks to the organizers. I want to thank also the city of Azmor. This is the second time I am here. I was here maybe 20 years ago. So lots have changed and so on. And so thank you so much for your hospitality.
When you were 5 years old.
I was 5 years old, yes. yeah. But thank you very much. So, so the talk, what I want to do is I want to do 2 things, or 3 maybe, God willing, okay? So the talk is Homo Atlanticus, the career and legacy of Estebanicus is Orantis in the Atlantic world. So I'm trying to coin in new concept, okay? The Homo Atlanticus. I am an anthropologist like my brother here, the archaeologist, and so I thought that given where Azmor is and given what we've been doing also in the last conference in New York, and given also the political framing, in terms of the Atlantic Partnership, the Royal Initiative, and what Dr. Lambo is involved in, I think. But I would frame it that way because I don't want to repeat myself, okay? So 2 things. I will briefly, many things have been said, so I will do a very quick passage on a few things, so to give a little bit of context. And the third thing is I want actually to talk about what this Homo Atlanticus is, okay? What it means, this new concept, and I hope you can have some questions that we can talk about, okay? Here, I brought my equipment with me. Okay, so this is the definition that I'm using for Homo Atlanticus. So, as an anthropologist, you've heard of Jabal Hood. If you have not, then you are not in Morocco, okay? So the term Homo Atlanticus is the wordplay on Homo sapiens, insan aql. And they use it here to denote human capacity to self-making and adaptability, to extreme difference in a wide range of cultural encounters and power dynamics among Africans, Europeans, and Americans, including indigenous peoples in the Atlantic Ocean or world. So you saw the great film of Sergio Cada. I think there is some of that there. So this is, I just want us to, I want you to be aware of where I'm going here. 2 things, you've heard this before, okay, there is, and again, we don't really have much, we don't know much about Estebaníco. Unfortunately, what we know about Estebaníco is his death and the manners in which and various interpretations of how he died. About his early life, John talked about the historical context of the Portuguese, the Spanish. We don't have much, really nothing. And young people, I'm not 5 by the way, okay? So unless you, the young people, can do the more research and find the other things. So there are 2 quotes there from a native Zuni. Sergio Cada took us to Zuni, an archaeologist. Basically the point there is that Estebaníco needs to be recognized just like the other conquistadors that came to Spanish America. And somebody yesterday, Dr. Mufaddal yesterday, who spoke in Arabic, I think, he mentioned the work of Terrell, okay? And again, this historian of the Old West, this is the Old West of the United States, basically says nothing, virtually we don't know anything about Estebaníco, okay? So something has to be done, and the book is also dated 1968, okay? So there has been a lot done, and we have Paul who needs to drink more coffee, okay, and water, okay, you know, has done in terms of his in brutal journey work and so on, as well as others. So that's a really. But having said there is not much, Native Americans, the Zunis, for instance, and the Hopis actually still have memories, or they have memorialized the encounter with ستيبانيكو. You saw some of the dances in Saad al-Qadar's movie. You know, you have these masked spirits, okay, who come to dance, okay, during Zuni or Hopi ritual. So what you see there is that you have 3 renditions of ستيبانيكو. This is how he's rendered as a Kachina or a spirit among Native Americans. All right, so I mentioned that. So this is where Zuni land that you saw in the movie, and this is his resurrection or reincarnation, whatever you want to use. You know, and some people don't. There are debates also in the literature among anthropologists about whether really this Kachina represents the encounter with ستيبانيكو or not. But some claim yes, and some. But the most important for us here is that the legacy, that encounter, that moment of blending that I would like to come and talk about. Okay. So I said virtually we don't know anything about ستيبانيكو except that he was at the end of Cabeza de Vaca's account. You have one sentence in Saad al-Qadar yesterday used it beautifully and strategically to answer about the lack of evidence, historical evidence. And basically it says he was a Negro Arabi de Azmor, and that's all you get. Okay. And in some other pages, I think my archaeology brother here yesterday quoted some pages from the account in French when it talks about, you know, his slippage in language, and so on, what you were mentioning yesterday, where he comes in and out. Right? Okay. So that I am old. Yeah. Where is my T-shirt? Okay, all right. So it's from Azmor for you, you know all this, but also this is very good because it's, you know. So Azmor is here, the beautiful city of Azmor. Okay, it's right here. So, all right. So I try to divide the talk into 5 acts. Okay. So Act 1, okay, or key players, ستيبانيكو, Dorantes, and so on. You've heard about the Narvaez expedition. I'm not going to repeat that story, okay. But you've seen this in Saad al-Qadar's film. This is one of the translations of Cabeza de Vaca's thing, okay. This is Saad al-Qadar's book, a translation of the Vaca and so on. And this is the route, you know, so from Azmor to Spain and so on to Mexico and what have you, right? Okay, and they are called, you know, some people call them the Florida Four. Okay, the remaining 4 that survived. I think you are all familiar with all of that. So this is just that's the Vaca, according to some people. Okay, we don't know if it's true, Cabeza de Vaca. This is actually when they were stuck in Florida trying to rebuild their boats and eating their horses. It's amazing, okay, they are the master bricoleurs, okay. It's just amazing, okay. There's some picture. This is the tabib that people were talking about, the healers, okay. I mean, so I just thought I would show you some of this. And this is a depiction of Indians following them through their journey of 8 years all the way to Mexico and what have you. Act 2, okay, so he gets to Mexico in 1536, Then the other three, as you heard yesterday, they decided not to join the northern expedition. So you have Viceroy Antonio de Mendoza, the Viceroy of the King of Spain. So they decided to send a reconnaissance expedition to Zuniland because there was competition among Cortes and the others too. So he wanted to beat them. So, and ستيبانيكو is in Mexico City. It's a little bit complicated. He gets appointed as the guide or the military leader of this expedition to Zuniland that you saw, right? And so on. Okay, this is just a map to show you a little bit about, this is from Terrell's book, the 1968. Okay, so go all the way to Zuni here. Okay. So they make it to Zuniland, okay, in 1939, and I'm glad that I had the film this morning. Okay. So in Zuniland, that's where ستيبانيكو meets his death or his end, and there are various stories, why he died at the hands of Native Americans. Okay, so there are people say that he was arrogant, that he was not respectful of the customs of the Native American people, of the Zunis, that he sent a particular item, a gourd, to the leaders of the Zunis, and the gourd was seen or interpreted as something that is outside of the Zuni culture, or it had some association with some sickness and other things. And the other association is that the gourd is associated with other people, nomadic, enemy, or hostile tribes from the south. And if you want to go deeply symbolic, the color red of the gourd also means violence. So this gourd was bringing something, okay? So for the Zunis, this was a foreign product, and they decided to kill him. There are other interpretations we could talk about, okay? This is the Hawiko village, and I was there actually 2 weeks after Sayyid al-Qadr, okay? Where ستيبانيكو was detained and killed. You saw that in the movie. I'm not going to talk about it. Okay, so he was killed because of his violating certain norms or cultural norms of the Zunis, because he was asking for turquoise and for women. So you will hear that he was a womanizer in a sense, okay? And I think that's to a certain extent that's not true, okay? Because the Zunis, if you other archaeologist colleagues who work on trade networks in this area of the Greater Southwest. I mean, it's hard to imagine that somebody is coming to you in peace, and you decide actually to murder him. And the Zunis in anthropology are known as peaceful people. If you are at the center or actually the western limit of the trade network, you don't want to kill people who are coming in peace. You want trade, you want business. So it's really bad for business to kill somebody who's just coming up. And there are other things we can talk about. So I don't buy it. I don't buy that that he, because of womanizing or because of arrogance. Because the conquistadores. Oh, what was it? I need water. I'm from Arashifia. I need water.
I give you.
Okay.
It's a fresh one.
I got it.
Good.
So it's really hard to believe that they killed him down. Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is Zuni. Okay. Okay. So a little bit back, I'm giving you the acts here. So act for coming back to Azmor, okay? So coming back to Azmor, the 16th century was awful, okay? Period, okay? So the 16th century in Morocco, you had political stability that John was talking about. You also had famine. You had insecurity, and so on. So the story, we heard it yesterday, and I think you alluded to it, because of all the politics, the famine, and so on, the presence of the Portuguese. People actually were throwing themselves on the Portuguese according to some readings to take them. Okay, so because of diseases, famine, about the historical literature tells me about 60,000 people just left with the Portuguese. Okay, and the claim they make in another paper is that ستيبانيكو was never a slave, was not a slave. He was an indentured laborer. Okay, or something like that. So, okay, so the ستيبانيكو here, right. Okay, this is really what I want to do. So I took you all over Air Rashidia, okay? We went down to Air Rashidia so that we can come back here. So come back here now, okay? So this is the story I want to tell, and I want to read it a little bit, okay? Because it's, this is, I think, what I want to spend my time on, okay? So the story of ستيبانيكو, or my story about ستيبانيكو, seeks to suggest a way of theorizing the presence and agency of Africans in the Atlantic Ocean cultural transformation, for which Mintz, the book on the left, and Price, okay, the birth of African American culture, is of critical theoretical importance. Rejecting a historical and discrete ethnographic description from both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, Mintz and Price called for a rigorous historization of African American culture studies. Mostly they argued for an analytical shift away from comparing ostensibly decontextualized elements of cultural formations to elements of historically grounded social entanglement. So there was a shift based on this book in African American studies. So this shift problematized the history and conditions of enslaved Africans in the Atlantic Ocean, moving away from the idea of origins, this is key, into a process of becoming and transformation, what's called in theory creolization, okay, or a synthesis of different elements from different cultures to constitute a newly established culture, okay? So you gotta be bear with the anthropologists. We love theory. That's how we make a living. Okay. So this theoretical move also ignited heated debates between anthropologists, who, like Mintz, my hero, okay, and linguists, and like Mintz, Price, and Wolf, and who understood Creole culture or mixtures of culture as new creations, and the other camp, if you want, the Caribbean linguists who emphasized cultural continuity, okay, between Africa and the Caribbean, or what they called advanced Afrogenesis, as an explanation of many of the cultural patterns described as Creole. The point here is that Mintz says, okay, he values how Africa informed the cultural making of the Caribbean and the New World. He did not dismiss that. That's important. But in the New World, you have a new creative, new forms or manifestations of culture because of the encounter. Okay, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the crazy Moroccan from Azmor, right? And Native Americans, of course. So So this is very, there is a process and there is a history that needs to be considered really to make sense of what those transformations are, okay? So despite Mintz and Price's pioneering approach to understanding transatlantic network and processes of social change through the framework of creolization or blending, their theory was mainly used by historians of North American slavery, and it framed many of the slavery studies in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and the 90s. And here in the book to the left, to the right there, so take Atlantic historian Ira Berlin's concept of the Atlantic Creole. And I'm coming to talk about what my brother Rambo raised about issues around the Atlantic. Okay, how do we actually materialize or conceptualize the Atlantic? So this notion of the Atlantic Creoles, which he coined to make sense of the cultural transformations of the Atlantic and its populations whose experiences in the age of the Atlantic slave trade were not primarily defined by the plantation economy. John talked about people who went to the New World without any association with the plantation economy. Okay, these were interpreters. You talked about the mulatto who was piloted for Christopher Columbus and other things. So this idea of Creole or mixing, okay, derived from linguistics and also used to emphasize cultural mixing and blending and transformation. It refers, I quote, those who by experience or choice, as well as by birth, become part of a new culture that emerged along the Atlantic littoral in Africa, Europe, and the Americas beginning in the 16th century. It departs from the notion of Creole that makes its birth definitive. Even more important, men and women could define themselves in ways that transcended nativity. African and Creole were as much a matter of choice as of birth, end of quote. So Berlin stresses the Atlantic Creoles were among the first African transported to the New World, and they become what he calls Black America's charter generation. This is a key term in his work, okay? Black America's charter generation up to the 17th century. They accompanied explorers and conquistadors such as Columbus, okay, Balboa, Cortez, De Soto, Pizarro, Narvaez, and they added Cabeza de Vaca, okay? So these Atlantic Creoles distinguished themselves as the charter generation whose experience, knowledge, and attitude were more akin to that of confident, sophisticated natives than of vulnerable newcomers. And he frames them as cultural brokers, and this is ستيبانيكو is perfect, okay, the cultural broker. So Berlin says as cultural brokers, quote again, by their experiences and sometimes by their persons, they had become part of the three worlds that came together along the Atlantic littoral, familiar with the commerce of the Atlantic, fluent in its new languages, and intimate with its trade and cultures. They were cosmopolitan, in the fullest sense. Atlantic Creoles originated in the historic meeting of Europeans and Africans on the west coast of Africa. Many served as intermediaries, employing their linguistic skills and their familiarity with the Atlantic's diverse commercial practices, cultural conventions, and diplomatic etiquette to mediate between African merchants and European sea captains, end of quote. So the story of ستيبانيكو de Durantes is a case in point. He's perhaps the very first African of this generation to walk upon the land that is now today the United States and America and the northern states of Mexico. In 1513, ستيبانيكو was sold into slavery between, quote, to the Portuguese in the city of Azmor, a Portuguese enclave on Morocco's Atlantic coast from 1508 to 1540. Did I get those dates, John, correct? Okay. Azmor was described by Leo Africanus, the Moroccan guy, okay? You gotta bring Moroccans in, okay? By Leo Africanus or Al-Wazan. The book was published in 1526, very interesting, just before the Narvaez expedition, right? Azmor, this is about your city, my friends, okay? He says it was a thriving coastal city of 5,000 inhabitants, quote, and does a bustling trade with the Portuguese merchants, its people very cultured, okay, and well-dressed, grows abundant grain, and has few fig groves, end of quote. The people of Azmor spoke Arabic, Berber or Tamazight, and Hebrew, and they were largely Muslim. Located at the mouth of Omarbia, which flows into the Atlantic Ocean, Azmor had an abundance of shabab, okay? Shabab. I am from Rashida, we don't have Shabab, okay. Located, where was I? So it had an abundance of shab, okay? And quote again, and its river fish sales brought in around 6,000 to 7,000 ducats, okay? And was then in note, and they quote, every year the Portuguese merchants came to buy vast quantities of these fish, paying such high duty, we were talking about duty yesterday, paying high duty that they advised their king to seize the city. So they, end of quote. It was Azmor's abundant resources that attracted a powerful Portuguese armada of the fleet that I talked about in 1530, as well as Portuguese merchants, of course. Okay. So after taking control of Azmor, the Portuguese got involved in acquiring slaves and shipping them to Portugal and Spain. As I discussed in my paper, ستيبانيكو was taken to Spain and perhaps sold by Portuguese merchants in Seville's slave market, and his buyer was Andres Dorantes de Caramba. As one of the first Africans of Spanish America's chartered generation, ستيبانيكو was one of the survivors of the Narvaez, as you all know. I can skip that one, okay? But I think an important point here, that point that links me to generations of captivity, and it's a quote that was quoted also yesterday, which was interesting. Cabeza de Vaca tells us something here, a quote about ستيبانيكو. Notes that in the course of their overland journey, he and his companions, quote, passed through a great number and diversity of languages. To maintain this authority, the battle we seldom talked with them, Native American groups. We made the Negro our intermediary. He was constantly in conversation, finding out routes, towns, and other matters we wish to know. Undoubtedly, ستيبانيكو was the most gifted linguist and communicator of the four survivors. Okay, so across the continent, I think there are some. I don't want to repeat some of these things, but I want to again just come back to this notion of Homo Atlanticus. So in light of seeing ستيبانيكو through the prism of Atlantic creolization, the question then for us is, can the Atlantic Ocean rediscover its Africans and Africa? That's a question that Al-Mukhtar raised. If so, one is likely to approach the Atlantic as a space anchored in a history of cultural entanglements without borders. This is very important. From the anthropology and history of the New World, exploration and conquest, we know that the Atlantic world was interconnected and was an exchange platform for the circulation of people, goods, and services inside and outside the physical boundaries of the Atlantic Ocean. We know that European and African diseases devastated American populations and civilizations. We know that European imperialism drained the Americas of its wealth and resources. We know that the transatlantic slave trade ravaged the demographic structure of Africa and arrested its social and political development. We know that now the crops, plants, and animals in Africa and in Europe were species unique to the Americas that crossed thousands of miles on European ships. In short, the Atlantic Ocean was globalized before the advent of today's globalization in ways that ignored the physical boundaries of the modern nation state. In this perspective, Atlantic history was transnational and oceanic, a history without borders, as Gaines would tell us. That said, the most pressing task is to reinstate Africa and Africans into the Atlantic Ocean. Given the African foundations in the making of Atlantic history, it is bizarre that this point needs to be raised again. The relative absence of African conceptualizations of the Atlantic is a result of the enduring dominance of Eurocentrism in the writings of history. Because European empires initiated the early ocean voyages of exploration to the Americas, conquistadors, chroniclers, and historians have too often framed the Atlantic Ocean as a Euro-American story without much thought given to the contributions and presence of Africans such as ستيبانيكو among those Europeans arriving in the New World. In conclusion, ستيبانيكو has come a long way, baby, for those of you who understand that expression. Way longer and perhaps harder than any of his companions on their epic journeys from Africa to Europe, across the Atlantic Ocean and across the continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific north of Mexico. Born and raised in Morocco, sold into slavery in Europe, converted to Christianity in Europe, enslaved in native North America, venerated as the child of the sun, and worshipped as a god, treasured as a wilderness diplomat and cultural broker, enslaved yet again in Mexico City, appointed by Viceroy Mendoza to serve as guide, interpreter, and scout for the Cibola expedition, and at last free, guiding the Spaniards into the promised land of the 7 cities of Cibola, where his journey seems to have come to an end, and his spirit continues to live in the world of Zunis and Hopis as the Black Kachina. ستيبانيكو's acts of self-making and becoming provide tangible evidence of the eminent contribution of the Atlantic Creoles. He deployed his cross-cultural smarts and linguistic gift to move so resourcefully between cultures and transcend his Moroccan/African origins. His journey is one of cultural adaptation, convergence, transformation, and transmutation to a Homo Atlanticus, a man of the Atlantic Ocean, a man of many cultures whose enduring legacy converged and transformed the cultural worlds and places of the Atlantic Ocean, and whose spirit has been resurrected as the Chacuena Katsina in the Pueblo communities and the big, wide, open skies of the American Southwest. I have a couple of slides.